do a review in Likutei Sichas in Chelek Cho. This is the second Sicha for the Parshas Toldos. In this Sicha, there's a long discussion to try to understand about the level of Esav. Esav, we read, was in his mother's womb, was already pulling for Avodah Zorah. And on the other hand, the Rebbe quotes a Yalkut Shimoni and the Zohar, which say that originally they were both tzaddikim, but meaning Yitzchak and Esav, Vayigdalu Hanaorim, would be also going on Esav. So, how does that fit? Was he evil from birth? And then the Rebbe is a whole discussion. How could we even say that somebody was evil from birth, especially being a son of Yitzchak? So how does this all fit in? And Rebbe explains the idea that this was just a potential. There's two levels. There is a Chosid Hama'ula in the Lashon of the Rambam who is righteous, and then we have a person who struggles to overcome. Esav was supposed to be that son that overcomes, but then of course he had the choice. So the fact that he had that tendency for still in his mother's womb, that means that he will be a child with tendencies, with struggles, but he still can overcome them, and that's why initially he was educated to go in the right direction. It was only later on that he chose to go the other way. And a lot of other details, as we'll see in the Sikha, we'll look inside and we'll go step by step. Till this base, Aleph. Bikesher, in connection, midem was der Posig zogt, vayigdalu hanaorim. Talking about Yaakov and Esav, it says the lads, the youngsters, they grew up. So growing up, what does it mean? It could mean physically, but in the Yalkut, it seems like it's talking about also on a spiritual level. That means that they grew up to become big spiritually. State in Yalkut Shimoni, the Esav Hoya Bechlal. It says Esav was included in the Na'arim growing up. Elo Shekil Kel B'Maisav, but later on in his action, he ruined it for himself, not becoming a Rasha, does haste. So according to the Yalkut, as der Taich von Vayigdalu, when it says they grew up, doesn't is not only talking about physically, is nit nor gidl begashmis. It's not just growing up physically in Yoren, they grew old in age, nor gadlus beruchnis. They grew up, they become great spiritually. Wie der Yalkut sagt Fardem. The Yalkut translates before this when he talks about the word great. Over there, it already says Ha'odom Hagodel Ba'anokim, the man who is a giant amongst the people, as a passing in Yehoshua. So the Medrash says Hagodel, who is the great? Elu Avram, Yitzchok, v'Yaakov. These are Avram, Yitzchok, Yaakov, shenikru gedolim. They are called great. That greatness means spiritual great. So therefore, by Yigdalu here, we're talking about that they grew up on a spiritual level. Und das, was mir gefindt, noch dem as Esav is given, the fact that we find later on, that Esav became nit ken godel beruchnis nor lahepech. Not only was he not a great spiritually, but the opposite, Arosha, is val kilkel b'maisa, because later on he went bad in his actions. He was chose to do bad. But originally, when he grew up as a gadol. He was big. He was spiritually at a high level. And the Rebbe will ask, how could we say that about Esav when we see later on that even in his mother's womb he was active? But the Rebbe first wants to say In the words of the Yalkut, we can still, it's not exactly clear. One wants to insist that it means just physically, it's not clear, but the Rebbe brings from the Zohar. In the Zohar, it says straight out that the greatness uh, was a spiritual greatness. Euch der Zohar is mefarish. Also, the Zohar explains as vayigdulu hanaori meant aruchnis dike gadlus, that yigdulu hanaori means a spiritual greatness. V'zel shonim. This is the language quoting the Zohar. Vayigdalu hanaorim, the lads became big. Sitra da Avram goron loin liis gadola. The Avram side caused them to grow up. Uzechusei sayalon, and his merit, the merit of Avram, supported, helped them become great. Who have a mechanech loin b'mitzvahs? He educated them with doing mitzvahs. La'asago Yaakov ve'Esav, to make great, to enhance uh, Yaakov and Esav. That is what Avram invested and raised both from Yitzchak's side. The Yitzchak comes from Avram. That supported Yitzchak's children to become great Vayigdal Neorim. So the Rebbe says this is more clear. Vados is noch mer b'meforish v'hadgosha. This is even more articulated. It's more emphasized. V'loitum pirush hanal fun Yalkut than the above explanation of the Yalkut. The Yalkut, one can argue. In Yalkut kemen einteitschen bedeuche kol ponim. In the Yalkut, one can interpret, even if it's squeezed a little bit, but you could squeeze in and say, as der vayigdulu was batzitzich euch auf Esav, when it says the plural, they grew up, which also refers to Esav. Meint nit gadlus ruchnis bepoil, doesn't mean actual spiritual greatness, nor belois an efshorius to zayin agodl beruchnis, just a possibility. There was an option. He might have become to zayin agodl beruchnis. He could have been a great beruchnis. Elo shekilkel b'maisov, so he ruined in his actions, so he never became great ruchnis. That's how one can squeeze the meaning in the Alkut Shimoni. But in Zohar, aber steht beferish. But in the Zohar quoted, it says very clearly, as der Vayigdalu meint, that Yigdalu means as Yaakov and Esav seine geworden gedolim beruchnis, that Yaakov and Esav became big, great spiritually. Bepoil. It means in actuality, bis to asiyas ha-mitzvahs bepoil. They were doing mitzvahs actually. Who have a mechanech loin b'mitzvahs. He would educate them in mitzvahs. Meaning that they were doing actually mitzvahs that the Abraham used to educate the grandchildren, basically, Esav and Yaakov. And it says that he actually educated them with mitzvahs, so they were doing mitzvahs, it says clearly. Okay, so nevertheless, so we see that Esav's beginnings weren't so bad, and actually they were by Yigdalu, they became great. So we need to understand. How can we say that Esav on his own, that he, who Esav is given the roi to Zaina Godel Beruchnis, that he was fit to be great spiritually. Unochmer. So first of all, you're saying that he was fit. That would be even according to the Alkut, that he could have been great. But Nochmer, according to the Zohar, as it is Bepoil given Agodel, that he was already great. He only turned around, no, they're not kilkel b'maisu. Afterwards, he ruined it through his actions. Be'ez, as if in Posik, how could we say that when on the verse, when Rivka came, she was having the labor pains, and or before by the children, the twins in her were running around. Zong Chazal, our sages of blessed memory tell us, und der Zohar allein bringt uns gleich noch ein Pirush Anal in Vayigla Orim. The Zohar himself brings this immediately after the above interpretation in Vayigla Orim. As shoin b'me'ei imay hat Esav sich gerissen zu Avodah Zorah, that already in his mother's womb, Esav was rushing to Avodah Zorah. Sich gerissen. He was being totally pulled of Avodah Zorah. But here we're saying that he had the potential for spiritual being great or was great. Noch better. Gleich noch Vayigla Norim is the pasuk Mamshir. The pasuk itself continues after they became great. Vahi Esav ish yedei etzayid ish soda, that Esav became a man who knows how to hunt. He was a person of the field, does haste. That means that the pasuk is saying, as der Vayigdalu von Esav hat sich ausgedrückt in them, that how did the Vayigdalu became old, that he became big of Esav, expressed itself in the fact was Vahi Esav ish yedei etzayid, that he became a hunter. That was the follow-up to the Vayigdal Orim, that they became big, so that he became Yidei Etzayid. So how could you say, as der Vayigdal made Gedula Ruchnis, that this Vayigdal means spiritual greatness, Vayigdal, they became spiritually great, when the pasuk itself follows that it was for hunting that he became a hunter, not any spiritual level. So what's going on over here? So the Rebbe wants to, in his base, try to answer the first question, that how could we say that he was great when in the mother's womb he had evil inclinations, that he was running after the Avodah Zarah? How could he? But maybe the Rebbe is going to say those evil inclinations stopped once he was born. Just like we say in the positive side, that a child, while he's in the mother's womb, is taught Torah, but then he forgets it when he goes. So maybe he forgot his evil inclinations, so maybe he became Vayigdalu. The Rebbe says no. L'chayre wollt man gekent base. L'chayre wollt man gekent enter in the erste Shaila now. The first question above that we asked, how could it be great Yiglan Orim when he was from the womb already he was running to Avodah Zarah. The second question, the Rebbe said the pasuk itself is mashma the Vayigdal Hana Orim is for Idei Etzayid, not for greatness and spiritual. But here the question was, how could he be spiritual great? The first question the Rebbe said, when he was already running after Avodah Zarah in the womb. Chazal Zogun, our sages of blessed memory say, as atinoik b'mei imei, that a child while in his mother's womb, melamdim oisei kol ha'Torah kulum, you teach him the entire Torah. V'kivan shabal li'avir ha'olam, and once he comes into the world, into the air of the world, he's born. But malach comes an angel, v'sotrei al piv, smacks him on his lips, on his mouth, u'meshakchei kol ha'Torah kula, and he has him forget all the Torah. He forgets all the Torah. The reason for it, the Rebbe explains now. Why wouldn't the parentheses? The Rebbe explained the reason for it. Because we want the child to have freedom of choice. We're not going to take away and make him a tzaddik just because he already learned all the Torah. So we make him forget, so he'll have to go through the struggles. We can say what the main purpose, the main reason for this, that we make him forget, that need vergessen kol Torah kula. If he won't forget all the Torah, that fell in zayin bechira chavshis, then he will be missing out on his freedom of choice. He needs to have a freedom of choice. We can't give him as darf doch sein. It needs to be, as the pasuk says, "Nosati lefanecha." The Eibishter says, "I've given before you Esachayim v'esatoiv, life and good, v'esamovis v'esara, death and evil, boifin shove equally. But this wouldn't be equal if we are going to keep the Torah that he learned already in his mother's womb, so it's not going to be equal. So therefore, we make him forget. So just like it's understood, which we say with regards to the Torah that we teach the child, the fun is verstandig binyanenu. From this, we can also understand this for our in our matter as b'shas haleda. Does at the time of birth is oddi hanhoga. So that conduct to reisen sich zu Avodah Zorah, that he's tearing to go himself to the Avodah Zorah, nishkach geworden von Esav. That has been forgotten von Esav. Kidei soll haben bechira chofshi, so that he should have freedom of choice. Und der Chinuch von Avraham b'chulu hat gewirkt b'chol ha'tokev. And the education of Avraham worked with the full force. So Take, he had an evil inclination while he had a natural run for Avodah Zarah, but that natural run has ceased once he was born. And Abraham influenced him. It could be Vayigdalu, so he maybe was great. But the Rebbe says it's not really fully explained, because we do find in the Zohar and the Chazal that actually the reason why Esav was a Rasha had to do with his tendencies, the way he was born in his mother's womb still. So here we're saying, no, that doesn't have an impact on him in actuality. So, but this is not maspik. That's not sufficient. Well, the Rebbe is not rejecting this idea, but the Rebbe says not sufficient explanation. While in the end of the day, this conduct that Esav conducted while he was b'mei imay in his mother's womb, it left on him a mark. He had naturally a tendency, a nature of being drawn to Avodah Zorah. That's brought as soll sich Peter sein Lavi de Zorah begadluse, which brought him to separating himself to the Avodah Zorah when he became an adult. Wie steht befehlish in Zohar, as it says very clearly in the Zohar, as ein später dicke Prishal Avodah Zorah, that his later on separating to Avodah Zorah begadluse when he was adult is gekommen begin kach. Vayigdlan Orim was before, but when he became an adult, he actually went to Avodah Zorah because of this begin kach. Was dosis duchte dis chazile. That was the side, the place that was shown to him, because that's the way he was already in his mother's womb. Mitzad sein reisen sich l'Avodah Zorah b'mei imay, because he was tearing himself and rushing to the Avodah Zorah while he was in mother's womb. That was the reason why he became a person worshiping Avodah Zorah at the end. So it does have to do with the way he was in his mother's womb. And this is also the same thing in the positive side with regards to why is the child taught the Torah when he was in his mother's womb, if later on he forgets it? It's because something is left over that'll help the child. Of course, he needs the bechira, but it still helps him. Says al derech vidos is in tzad kedusha now, similar to the way it's in the tzad kedusha above that we said before. As the lernen kol Torah kula b'mei imei, that one studies, the child studies the entire Torah while in mother's womb. Afapi as the noch mishakchi kol Torah kul, even though the angel later on smacks him on his lips, on his mouth, and he forgets the whole Torah. So what's the purpose? Is val the limud b'mei imei, because still the study that he learned in his mother's womb lost iber in them kin. This leaves a mark in the child, as there's also the nochtzi and to Torah that later on he should draw himself to Torah. So there is a impact, and there is a mark left from what happened then. So since Esav's mark was the pulling to Avodah Zarah, and that brought him about to actually turn to Avodah Zarah. Is Hadra Kushya Leduchte? The question comes back to its place. Wie sagt man as ve'esav hoya bechlal di gedolim? How could we say that Esav was included by Yigdalu Hanor in the plural? They were became great. Ela shekil b'maisav, but he ruined in his action when Esav had that tendency, which actually caused him later on. How could he have become great in his Maisim before he actually separated and became Lavei Zorah? So the Rebbe over here tried to say that notwithstanding that he had that tendency, but maybe this is forgotten once you're born, just like the Torah, the person forgets, the child forgets. The same thing is Asa forgot his Avodah Zarah tendency, but the Rebbe says no, that Avodah Zarah tendency is the one is pushed him later on to become Perish Avodah Zarah, to serve Avodah Zarah, just like the child's learning Torah helps later on. There's a mark left from it. So the question is, how could we say that Asa became great, that he became great in Torah when he had this tendency, and that pushed him to Avodah Zarah and tell him that he became great Beruchnis, a spiritual level. The Rebbe brings in now in Eis Gimel another question that also about the pasuk that the Rashi that they brought down before, that the Yaakov and Esau were fighting. It says they were fighting about Olam Haba and Olam Hazeh. So what is there to fight about? Esau wants Olam Hazeh, Yaakov wants Olam Haba. So they don't have to fight. Why are they fighting about the Nachlas Shnei Elamis? Sounds like even Esav wanted Elam Haba. Why would Esav want Elam Haba? He only wants, seemingly should be Elam Hazeh. And that's going to be the key. The Rebbe is going to explain that even Esav is in a level of Kedusha that has, this is the challenging life that the Eibishter gave him in order for him to overcome it for the level of Tshuva, as the Rebbe will explain. If in Pasuk Gimel, if in Pasuk by Yisreitza to Abonim Bekirba, that the sons, they were uh, quarreling, running around in her. So there's another interpretation. The first interpretation, we said that Yaakov was going to the Beis Medrash and Esau was running to Avodah Zarah. Zogn Chazal noch a pirush. Our sages give us another explanation. As the Hisroitzutzuz, the running around, or the Kriegerei, the quarreling was zwischen Yaakov and Esau is given between Yaakov and Esau was Bishvil Benachlas Shnei Elomes, inheritance of the two worlds. What are the two worlds? Bishvil Ha'olam Hazeh, Ha'olam Haba, this world and the world to come. The Rashi brings this down in the pasuk also from the Yalkut. The second pirush, that they were fighting over the inheritance of the two worlds, Ha'olam Hazeh and Ha'olam Haba, is to more. So that's a little surprising. Why would they be fighting over it? In was ist bestanden the Meriva zwischen Yaakov and Esau? What did the argument between Yaakov and Esau consist of? Esau had gewollt Elam Hazeh. Esau wanted Elam Hazeh, wanted this world. When Yaakov Elam Haba, and Yaakov wanted the world to come. Haben sie doch nicht gehabt, wegen was zu kriegen sich. So why did they have to argue? Let Yaakov take Elam Haba and Esau have Elam Hazeh. That's what they really wanted. Muslimen sagen, we have to say, as Esau had gewollt nicht nur Elam Hazeh. Esau wanted not only this world, he also wanted Elam Haba. Yaakov nicht nur Elam Haba, Yaakov not Elam Haba, wanted this world too. Nor jederer von sie hat gewollt beide Elam, as they both wanted both worlds, this world and the world to come. Okay, is Tomu is surprising. For Vozol Esav Arosha Velen Elam Haba. Why should the evil Esav want Elam Haba? It means to say that even in the level of Esav, there is a desire for Elam Haba, because that's why they're fighting. The Rebbe brings the Chazal that they were fighting over Elam Hazeh and Elam Haba. Why would they be fighting over that? That tells us that Esav, notwithstanding that he's the Rasha, but he wants Olam Haba. Why does he want Olam Haba? That's the Rebbe going to explain that in this level of Esav, it's a challenging Esav, but he's not. He still wants Olam Haba, as the Rebbe will explain. So first, the Rebbe is going to explain the previous statement that Esav was rushing to Avodah Zarah. How could it be that Yitzchak should have children in such a tendency? Yitzchak being so a Merkava, being a chariot to Kedusha, totally subjugated to Hashem. How could he have a son that wants Avodah Zarah inherently? That's his nature. How does that? It always tells us there's something more going on over here than just the simple thing that he wanted Avodah Zarah. Dalit. First, we have to introduce explaining in the Maimer Chazal Hanal, in the above mentioned saying of our sages of blessed memory, that even while he was still in his mother's womb, he was already rushing and trying to run out from his mother's womb. Seemingly, this is very surprising. The Ove Zainen Gewena Merkove Tzurotzin Ha'elya. Our forefathers were a Merkava. Merkava means the highest. They were a chariot. They were a carriage and subjugated to Hashem, to the will of the Supreme, of Hashem's will. Well, the Alter Rebbe is Mevayed in Tanya. The Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya. As Kol Levirehem Kulam, all of their limbs. And Leinasem Merkova L'rak L'rotzin Ha'elya and Levade Kol Yimeim. They did not become a chariot, meaning subservient. The only thing that they wanted is do the supreme will. Only that, Kol Yimim older die, doing what Hashem wants. Is the Pashut, so that it's obvious. Azayah told us that their children are geboren betachlis hakdusha. The children that they had, they were born in total holiness. And in these children, there is the power of the Father. The Atzmi is from the Ma'av, as the Alter Rebbe brings from the Tanya, that the essence of the Av goes into the children. Rebbe brings a reference to L'Kudesiches, that the essence of the Av is in the children. Behind Viken Zayin, how is it possible? As Yitzchak Sazun, the son of Yitzchak, so Zichtzien Beteva Shaloi Tzavei Zorah should naturally, in his nature, go to Avodah Zarah. How could Yitzchak's son, who was a Merkava at such a high level, have a son that draws to Avodah Zarah? The question is not why he chose Avodah Zarah. He has Bechira Chavshis. The question is in the mother's womb. How in his mother's womb does he want Avodah Zarah? Those was Esav is the gewachsen Rasha. The fact that Esav later on grew up to be a Rasha is kinkashin. It's not a question. But he ruined in his action. Every person has the freedom of choice to conduct themselves as they wish. And Esav chose, so people have choices, even if they come from the nicest family and they have the greatest lineage. But people choose. Esav chose because of the surrounding, the community, which is Hakanani Asher Anochi Yoshev B'Kirbei. He referenced that is the Kanani that I sit amongst them. He didn't want him to marry, send Eliezer. He didn't want the Shanechi B'Kirbei. He had dealings with Nimrod who rebelled against Hashem, etc. So he chose to ruin and go bad. Those are his choice, his actions. The Maisim those are actions that he chose through his choice. That's why he ruined himself through them. That did not come of Yitzchak, God forbid. Nor Kediyuk Loshen Chazal, as the specific, exact language of our sages of blessed memory, they say Yitzchak sheyotza mimenu Esav. Esav left him, went out of him. Esav is a roisun sich abgeteilt. Esav what came out and separated himself. Yotzov and Nifrat. He went out and he separated from Tchumesh Shel Yitzchak, from the boundaries of Yitzchak. That was his choice. He went and he left. Yotze, he left, but that's not Yitzchak. Here we're not talking about what happened later. We're talking in the womb, in his mother's womb. But here we're saying, as noch Eder is geboren geworden, before he was born, das heißt, which means noch fahren abteilen sich von der Verbundenheit mit Yitzchak und Rivka, even prior to him separating himself from his connection with Yitzchak and Rivka. He's still in the mother's womb. He's still connected. But as a Shegit Zari was already drawn to Zari. How could that possibly be? Und hat kach ist das beim Gewinn eingewurzelt. It was so rooted by him, bis as das hat gewen to the end, that this caused that he had this nature already from the mother's womb. This brought about in the end. This had been so rooted in Esav that das hat gewen, that this caused Canal. Zer says that this caused as that he should separate himself to Aved. So the Rebbe is starting to explain by asking, how could this even happen to Avram to have a son like Esav, who naturally, when Avram, I mean Yitzchak, who was a Merkava all the years, how could he have a son? So Mele, later on, he freedom of choice. Okay, everybody can choose. He has a freedom of choice. So Yotza, he left him. Okay, his son left Yitzchak. He went out of the territory of Yitzchak, the holiness, and he became Avodah Zorah. But here we're talking about in the mother's womb. He's still connected with Yitzchak and Rivka. How is it that he had already that need and desire to rush to Avodah Zorah when Yitzchak, who's a Merkava, how does that happen? And that was actually the cause that brought him to Avodah Zorah later on. The Rebbe is going to say that by explaining how everything that is by the fathers happens to the children, and one of the things that happens by the children, meaning by Klal Yisrael, we have both levels. We have a level of a tzaddik who is always doing the righteous thing, and then we have the level somebody has to conquer his Yetzer Hara. But since we're saying that Yaakov, he's saying that Yitzchak was a Merkava, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, they were always a Merkava. They always wanted to do the right thing. So where do we find them having to conquer the Yetzer Hara to inherit it to their children? Where will the children get that koyach to inherit when the father never had any any challenges? And let's say that the founders had challenges from the outside, because inside they were a merkava, they always wanted to do what's right, but there were obstacles from the outside. But obstacles from the outside can't measure up to the obstacles that you have from the inside. So where do Yidden later on, who have obstacles and challenges from the inside, where do they get the strength from when the parents didn't have that strength? Or where do we get the koyach from? And the Rebbe will explain. This is the Esav over there, which is the challenge that we'll see in a minute. Hey, the Bir B'cholzeh explains. Says Yedua be'inyan ma'isa of his simin lebonim. So in the matter of what happens, the act of the father is a sign for the sons. So on the very simple level, we learn what happened to the fathers is a sign is going to happen to the sons. History repeats itself, basically. But here we're saying it means a lot more than that, which means what happens to the father gives koyach. That is the power to the children to succeed in what they're doing. They take it from the fact of what their fathers did. In Azmaisa Ovis, or meaning that what is meaning as is the Nesinas Koyach, that gives the power, the strength of their avodah from Bonim Eden, that gives them the power for their service. Their funis move on. So from this we understand as Ali Efane Avodas Hashem, that all kinds of service of Hashem, because the Bonim which exists by the children, Seinen euch voran beöfen shall simen al koponim in myself also exist, at least in a way of a sign in the act of the fathers. So the Rambam. So in other words, we have everything, all kinds of stuff. The Rebbe is going to bring down from the Rambam that there's two types of avodas. There's the avodah of a person who is a refined person versus a person with challenges. And the question is, where did the person with challenges get the koyach from? Avram and Yitzchak and Yaakov were Merkovas. The Rambam Nishmayna Parokim is Mabar Barucha. The Rambam in the 8 chapters explains at length the Tzvei Avodah, the two types of services. HaChosid HaMeula, the elevated Chosid. But is Melechatchila Misabe Nor Tzutoiv. He, to begin with, all what he wants to do is good. And then you have one HaKoivish is Yitzray, and then you have one who conquers the Yitzhara. Who yearns, who has tivus, he has desires for bad, but he conquers his heart. So we need explanation. Since the fathers were like the Merkava, always bottled to the will of Hashem Kinal, who is their Simon Lebonim for Maisa Ovis? Where is the koyach, the sign for the children? Where is the strength from the children, from the act of the fathers, for the service of conquering the Yetzer? So where do we find that? How do we get that koyach? Noch better. The Rebbe says more. Sometimes you conquer Yetzer Hara, but you conquer it. But sometimes you fail also. Amongst the Avodas, people that fail, they do tshuva. Where do you have the koyach for tshuva, which is even more than conquering the Yetzer Hara? Nachman. HaKoivish is Yitzra l'chol hapoches, somebody who conquers the Yetzer Hara. At least such a person, tutnit kerabe poel, doesn't do anything bad in actuality. And he's not misavet to pulus harois. He just desires, yearns, has a taiva to bad actions. But in actuality, Yasin not a taivas, he only does good. As is aber voran by Yidden da Avodah von Tshuva, but Yidden also have the service of Tshuva. Zu verrichten am Eise Bilti Toiv in order to correct. Tshuva means to correct an action which was no good. Wie shaykh der Inyan von Tshuva in Poshet and Zin, how does it apply? How do we apply Tshuva in the simple sense? Meaning for an Avera, not Tshuva to return the Neshama, higher level, and Tshuva to make correct the sin that you've done wrong. How do we get the koyach in Maisa Ovis in the act of the fathers? Was the funds over Nasim and Nusinas koyach lebonim from that act of the forefathers? That should become the sign, and they given the koyach to the sons. So the Rebbe explains by asking, where everything the forefathers gave koyach to the children, to the Bnei Yisrael for their avodah. So Mela, the avodah from the Chosid Ula, the anybody does right, we can get from the forefathers. But how do you get from the one that has challenges and has to conquer Yetzer Hara? How do we get from the forefathers somebody who actually does and has to do teshuvah? He actually did wrong, and then he has to do teshuvah. Where do we see this by Avram? Avram was in the Yitzchak and Yaakov. They were Merkava. They never did anything wrong. And in Oisvav, the Rebbe is going to say, well, maybe over there they didn't have actually inside challenges, but they had challenges from the outside they had to overcome. But the Rebbe said that's still not sufficient to give koyach for somebody who has challenges from the inside. Challenges from the inside can be a lot more debilitating, can be a lot more challenging than challenges on the outside. And the Rebbe will explain in Oizvav. Oizvav. L'chayre would make you can't answer, and it seems that we could answer. As af al pias de ovis haben nit gehat kein sterringen im bifnim chas v'sholem. Although the forefathers had no interferences from the inside, they were a merkava, they were totally subjugated to the will of the above. So there was no inner struggles, God forbid, seinen aber Gewöhnstellungen mit Bachutz. But still there were outside interferences from them arum, from the surrounding Kinas Kiniska Leil, Haknani Asher Anoichi Bikiba, the Canaanite that were around there. Was gedarft koivish sein, so they needed to conquer those uh, um, difficulties that came their way because of the outside. Kumt ois. So it turns out, as a Aveda hat sich geteilt in zwei Sugim, that their service was divided into the two categories. The Aveda Ba'aliyah Medarge Ledarge in Kedusha Gufa, the service of elevating from step to step within Kedusha itself. Und das, was sie haben sich misgaber gewinnen with die Menis Mebachutz, and the fact that they over strengthened themselves, they overpowered the obstacles that came from the outside. Was the his gabrus vikibush, that overpowering of the obstacle and conquering in Avodas Ha'odam, in the Avodas office, in the service of the forefathers, is an esinas koyach, that becomes the power that is given, the siman labonim, of the Avodah from Koivishas Yitzray, for the service of conquering the Yetzer Hara. So we do have these two Avodas. Aber Rabbi said, "Das is lechayre nit kein biur maspik." It's not a sufficient explanation. Weil in kama protim, because in many details, is schwerer zu sein a Koivishas Yitzray. It's more difficult to conquer your inclination, your zu misgaber sein, of the menis mibifnim, to overcome on those obstacles preventing that come from the inside. Vitzu sich misgaber sein, then to overpower of menis shebachutz, on those preventings that come from the outside. The obstacles from the outside are sometimes not as difficult as the obstacles that come from the inside. So while we find that the forefathers had to overcome the obstacles from the outside, but we don't find, where do we get the koyach to overpower the obstacles that come from the inside, which wasn't by the others. Ulefizeh, is of der avodah von Eden. How is on this service of a yid, on the sinas koyach for Maisa Ovis, how do we get the power from the act of the fathers? So the Rebbe says that the way that one actually overcomes the Yetzer Hara is by the tremendous power that comes of being connected, wanting to listen to Hashem. So basically, overcoming, if you love Hashem and you're connected to Hashem in a very powerful way, you actually gives you the koyach to overcome. So while they didn't have the obstacle, but they had that powerful connection. Let's look inside. Ein of the bodies in them. One of the explanation in this, the mile from koivish yitzray, the advantage of conquering the yetzer is in them, consists in the fact was od di gevura kegen sein yetzer, that when you strengthen yourself against your inclination, bringt a rois, that express it, it brings out wie starker ist zugebunden zum Obersten, how strong you're tied to Hashem. As Chezer is misave zu ulei sarois, even though he has a yearning, a taiva to bad activities, von deswegen, and yet still schwacht es nicht up sein Rotzen zum Folgen dem Ebersten. It does not weaken his resolve, his will to listen and obey Hashem, und ton bloß do only good. So the advantage, how do you overcome the negativity? That is by your intense and strong connection to Hashem, that you won't allow for all these taivas to deter you and take you away from the connection to Hashem. And similar to this, and even more than this, is the Milo Ugevura von a Baal Tshuva, is the advantage and the strength of a Baal Tshuva. As trotzdem was is durchgefallen und getan an Aveda, notwithstanding that he failed and he did a sin, is by him that innerlicher Verbund mit Neubriste mit Azatoike. So his inner connection to Hashem is with such force, bis das bringt ihm zu Koiver sein dem Ra. That leads him, that brings him to conquer the evil. Charot haben von Ovar, to regret the past, und sich umkehren l'avodas Hashem, and to return back to the service of Hashem. And that's why, since it depends on the Asay Tov, that on his connection to Hashem, that connection from Hashem comes from the office. Und der Far is Maisa office. Similar bonim, eich benegeya to the Aveda. We say the koyach. The fathers gave the koyach, the forefathers, the sign, gave the koyach to the sons. Eich benegeya to the Aveda from koyvishes Yitzrei, also as the service from conquering the Yitzhorah. Unavedas tshuva, and doing tshuva. Koyvishes Yitzrei, not to fail, and even if you fail, to do tshuva. Because this force of tie to Hashem was kein Zach kennen nit abschwachen. There is nothing that can weaken that. Hat men be Yerusha from the office. We have this inherited from our forefathers. They were constantly always a chariot to Hashem. But often in such a way as in them is nit given shayich ken hefsek afilu shoachas. There was not even one while an interruption of their connection to Hashem. So that force of connection that brings you to tshuva, that brings you to overcome your Yetzer Hara, comes from the forefather. That's the koyach und der riber, and therefore. Afal pias the gevura from the ovis, that even though the strength of the forefathers, in practically speaking, it only expressed itself, nor only only to preventing things that prevented, that interfered from the outside, is aber the sibes hagavura, but still the reason for that strength, but this is there's toikev haiskashrut. Where does it come from? It comes because of the forceful connection to Hashem. That becomes an esinas koich lebonim. That becomes the power to the children, lagabe zeir menias mivifnim, to address their prevention that comes from the outside. So this force of the Father, so it is inherent to them, because the way to overcome is with the intense connection to Hashem, and that's what we get from our forefathers. So practically speaking, the forefathers didn't have challenges from the inside, but they had challenges from the outside. But how were they able to overcome the outside challenges from the force that was their connection? That is helps and gives the koyach to the children to connect even in the outside. However, the Rebbe is going to explain now that while in actually the others didn't have challenges, but that's why they had children that did have some of these challenges. This was part. That's how we explain how Esav can have these tendencies. L'chatchila, the Rebbe will explain. Zayin. Bald avodas hat sich geteilt in die zwei Sugim, since the service of the forefathers divided itself into two categories of above, hat sich das azoi euch abgespiegelt benegea zer Toldos. This also mirrored how their children. The oves haben gehat zwei Sugi Toldos. The forefather had two types, two categories of children. Behesem zu the zwei Sugi Avodah, as it fits these two types of services. HaChosidam Ula, that the Rambam writes, the elevated level of the Chosid, unakoivishes Yitzrein, one who conquers the Yetzer. Ubin Yonenu, in our discussion over here, sein does the Toldos Yitzchok, they are the Avos in general, these are the two children of Yitzchak, Yaakov and Esav Amurim beParsha. Yaakov and Esav, El Toldos Yitzchak, so Rashi, this is Yaakov and Esav that are in the Parsha. These are the two categories of the Avodah. Yaakov is Ishtam Yeshav Olim. Yaakov is an innocent, sits in the tents, studies Torah. HaChosid HaMa'ula, he is the elevated Chosid. Und Esav is Ish Yidei Tzayid Gomer. He was a hunter. Behesim to that Avodah, that fits the service from Koivishes Yitzroi, conquering the Yetzer. Und das hat sich angeheben noch als Toldos. This started even as they were still just being born by Yisroi to be made imam. They were running around in the mother's womb. The chiluk is aber. The difference between the two categories of work, of service of Hashem, the way it's by the office, and now we're saying that it manifests itself in their children, in Yitzchak and in Esav and Yaakov. The difference is that by the Ovis was Heinen Amerkove, since they are the chariot, is Nitokin Ort Faramatzias Sodrachas Vesholom, there is no room for an entity of something evil, God forbid. Masha'enkim Bazeira Toldos, as opposed by their children. Was Toldos seinen doch nicht of his children are not the fathers, they're not the level of the fathers. Nor mechutz lehem, they're outside, they're Toldos, outside of them. Is Shayich HaMetzias Fun Ra, over there is already has a connection, there could be an existence from evil. Nor Zayindik told us from the Ovis, but since they are children of the Father, is as nit keram mamesh v'gomur, it is not an actual complete evil, but in an oifun, but it's in a way, azay mitzias is belois kidei tzarufun durch them, but the existence of evil is just merely for the extent to overcome the evil. So it's not evil itself, but it's evil to challenge you to overcome it. In an oifen azay mitzias is beloy kidei tzarufun, just in order to call out durch them through that existence of that ra, the meaning from koivishes yitzray, to conquer your Yetzirah. That is the extent that this expresses itself in the Toldos, those who are not the fathers, but they are the children. Similar to what is explained in the saying of our sages of blessed memory. Seems like a strange saying. Hashem says, the saying says, I don't know which one Hashem really wants. Does he want in b'maise elu? Does he want what these are doing, b'maseim shel rishoyim, the act of rishoyim? We're not sure what the Eibishter wants. Maybe he wants the act of the rishoyim, in b'maise elu, end quote, or he wants these maseim shel tzadikim. What does that mean? We said we don't know. Originally, we don't know which Hashem wants. That's surprising. How could there even be a thought? How could there be even a possibility as the Eibishter soll sein chofetz b'maseim shel rishoyim, that God should want the act of the evil? I mean, how could that be? Steht them der biur. So the explanation is written about this. As the inyan from chofetz b'maseim shel rishoyim is that what does it mean that Hashem wants the act of the rishoyim, not the actual? The chofetz in koivish zayin demaisi. Hashem wants is to conquer the not the actual act of the rishoyim, but the conquering of the rishoyim. The chofetz is koivish zayin demaisi. Avodas hatshuva, service of shuva. Mitzad them Ebersten, from the perspective of Hashem, was leigurcha ra, where evil does not dwell there, is the mitzias fun maseim shel rishoyim, the act of the the existence of an act of the evil, nit derat chas v'sholem. That's not the evil, God forbid. From Hashem's perspective, there is no ra, nor is the avodah satshuva was kum durch them. This is the service of tshuva that comes through that. That's the masayim shel Rishoyim. Well, derech zeh b'negeya to Esav. Similarly, is as it connects to Esav. Das, was is given, und noch geboren geworden mit Hateva. That's what he was, and then he was born with the nature for ziehen sich zu Avodah Zorah, von being drawn to Avodah Zorah. Das mit Sad Yitzchak given, from Yitzchak's perspective, why was that? Belois zu kennen durch dem durchführen der Avodah, only so that he should be able to accomplish through this the service from Kovish Yitzchak to conquer his Yitzchak. That's why he had that nature coming from Yitzchak, not as evil in of itself, but evil to the extent to able to conquer it. But what happens to Poel Mamish? Not Azoivi Esav is given a Baal Bechira. Since Esav had choice, he's kilka b'maisav. He ruined with his actions. Yotzu mimenu, and he from him, from Yitzchak went out. He left. He separated himself from the holiness of Yitzchak. Und hat Adarab, the contrary, he brought out that evil from potential to actuality. Instead of fighting it, he brought it out. But that was his choice later on. But in the womb, as he was a descendant, that's Yitzchak's avodah of having the temptation and overcoming the temptation, or even failing to coming back. That is the extent of what it comes as it's connected to the kedusha of Yitzchak. So the Rebbe explains over here that there is the challenge. Yaakov's challenge, or the Ovis's challenges, was not in the actual negative by itself, but it had to be also giving koyach for challenges. So therefore, it expressed itself in also having an Esav, and it also expressed itself through having the kovishes yitzray, just like explained the Maimer Chazal. You want maseim shel rishoyim doesn't mean the act of rishoyim; it means to overcome them. So now we'll understand what it means that they were fighting about the inheritance of the both worlds, because Esav also wants that world. Ches. Based on this, we'll also understand the running around and the quarreling to Yaakov and Esav, to Yaakov and Esav is about the inheritance of the two worlds. Since we're discussing about Esav, as he is in his mother's womb, does haste. We're talking about he's still in the territory of Kedusha, he's in his mother's womb. Is verstandig is understood as ein demoltike Wellen Elam Haze, that what he wanted Elam Haze is an Inyan in Kedusha. That was a holy matter, wasn't Lemal Yusa. It was an advantage he wanted. Was kommt als Zitzor von dem, was is Toldos Yitzchak. It's because he's Yitzchak's son, so he wants the Elam Haze. Einer von den Chilukim zwischen der Avodah von der Chosid and Me'ula. One of the differences between the Chosid, the great elevated Chosid, and Kovish Yitzray that the Rambam talks, and one who conquers his Yetzer, is by a Chosid HaMe'ula, by the elevated Chosid, HaYois HaZayin Avodah, is the Aliyah Medargel Dargel in Kedusha Kufa, since his service is to go up from step to step in Kedusha itself, the Ribet the Herzig by him. So therefore, by him, you sense by him as the Rikir v'tachlis is shleimus ha'aliyah, that the main and the goal is the complete elevation. He senses going higher. Going higher, that is what is considered the goal. The goal is to get as high as you can. Olam haba, the world to come. Vos is an olam barer. That is a very clear world, the world to come. On Kain Taruvas Tevara, there's no mixture of good and bad. Kulei Kodesh, it's all holy. Und dazu strebt will, and that's what he strives to, and that's what he wants. He wants Olam Haba. As opposed to a person who is struggling to conquer his Yetzer, where der Herd, he senses that the main advantage is the service in this world. There are prevention, there is things that hold back. There are obscurity, there's blocks. And he overpowers them and he conquers them. On the far, and therefore is the Hisreitzitzus zwischen Yaakov and Esau. The running between Yaakov and Nachlas Shnei Elomes. It was as it connects to both worlds, both worlds. Jeder von den zwei Fanim Avodah is kolul euch von dem zweiten Neufen. Each of the two types of service is also included from the second type. Even the elevated chosid darf ton avidos in elam hazeh dafke. He does his service in this world. He strives for elam haba, but the work is done in this world. Only on the other hand, muzak koivish yitzrei, the one who has to battle his yetzer, he must go from step to step in kedusha gufa, go higher and higher. And muzak uprising von elam hazeh. He has to tear himself away from this world. Even the service of Elam Hazeh, all the challenges that he overcomes, to sort out Elam Hazeh and turn it and make it into holiness. That it shouldn't be Elam Hazeh, to elevate it. And to devote himself, at least from time to time, maybe not always, on the service of Olam Haba, which is within the Olam Hazeh, Yeshav Holim. So while each one senses the Madrege, the Chosid HaMeula needs to do his work Dafkin Olam Hazeh. And the person who's struggling with this world and that needs to also overcome this world, and he must also elevate it and sort it out, make it holy and elevate himself. He has to become from time to time Yeshav Holim. The Chelek is obvious. The difference, however, is by the Chosid HaMeula is the Yirid in Olam Hazeh Tzulu Olam Haba. But the elevated Chosid, the descent into this world, is for Olam Haba. Tzukumen durch Olam Hazeh zu der Echste Dargen Aliyah B'Kodesh, so that he can reach through this world to the highest step in elevating of Kodesh. The purpose of coming down into Olam Hazeh is because of Olam Haba, to get Olam Haba, to be able to elevate it to the highest level of Aliyah B'Kodesh. And by Kodesh Yitzrei is verkehrt. By one who conquers the Yitzrei is just the opposite. Das, was is sich äußert in der Inyan von Yeshiva Holim, why does he also occupy himself sitting in the tents and studying Torah is kidei as ein aveda mitun in Olam Hazeh, so that his work in Olam Hazeh so sein betachlis hashleima should be with complete, ultimate completeness. So the Chosid HaMeula works for Olam Haba. The Kovish Yitzrei works for Olam Hazeh. The Chosid HaMeula wants to get to the highest level of Olam Haba. The Kovish Yitzrei wants that the Kavisha, the Yetzer, should be in fullest measure, so therefore he needs to also be Yoshev Holim. On the far, mitzad in Yoneh Shel Yaakov Yoshev Holim, and therefore from Yaakov's matter Yoshev Holim ver tachlatosei, so his decision is as mendavel Elam Haba, that you want Elam Haba, and Euch Elam Hazeh is Tzuli Elam Haba. That everything is Olam Haba, but how could he get to Olam Haba? You need to work in this world. So Olam Hazeh is also for Olam Haba. He wants both, but he wants Olam Haba. He wants Olam Hazeh, so Olam Hazeh gives him Olam Haba. But from Esau perspective, it's just the opposite. Is Ba'am Derikir Olam Hazeh. He mainly wants this world. That the advantage that comes out through the service in this world, that is what he wants. And that ilus the avodah von Elam Haba, but the service of the world to come is to leave that avodah in Elam Hazeh. That is because of the Veda Elam Hazeh. So they both want both, but depending what is the main goal. So Yaakov, Yeshiva Holim, wants Elam Hazeh so that can give him Elam Haba. And Esav, Yeshiva, the opposite, the one who's Avedis Habirurim, Kovish Yitzray, main thing is Elam Hazeh, but the Avoid of Elam Hazeh can only come through Elam Haba. So Elam Haba is for the purpose of Elam Hazeh. Now, in Oi's test, the Rebbe comes back to explaining the question that he started off. How can we say Vayigdlu Hana Orim that they grew in the Ruchnis? Their meat is Ech Muzbar. Now, with this, it also understood, explained, was Chazal Zogun, that sages of blessed memory say, as Vayigdlu Hana Orim meant Gadlus Ruchnis, that they grew big, means spiritual greatness. The Zoyar is noch Meisip, and the Zoyar adds to it, as Avraham had mechanech given euch Esav, that Avraham educated also Esav b'mitzvahs. Bis soll werden a Gott beruchnis b'poel, so that he became great spiritually in actuality because he was doing mitzvahs. So now we understand it. And that Avraham, the grandfather, Avraham, hobendig dem koyach von Yitzaves, Bonoves, Beis of Achrov. He had the power that Hashem said that he should instruct his sons and his family that follow him. They should keep the way of Hashem, the path of Hashem. He impacted Esavon as zol zayin a kovish es yitzere bepoil, that he should conquer Yitzhar actuality, that he should start off that way, that he should conquer Yitzhar. Und das is was der Pasuk is mamshich, and this is what the Pasuk continues as der vayigdalu, that this growing up von Esav hat sich heraus gesagt in Vahi Esav ish Yedea Tzayid ish Sode, that Esav became a man, a hunter who knows the field, a man of the field, val euch der inyan, because even this thing going out in the field with us is mitzad Avram v'Yitzchak, from the perspective of Avram v'Yitzchak is lemal Yosef. That's an advantage to the challenging world to overcome it. Zayin dikan ish Sode, being a man of the field, as tut sein Aveda in Welt, that he does his service in the world, is bichdei zu goiver sein, in order to overpower und goiver sein, and to conquer the halomes v'astadium von Sode, those obstacles and blocks of the field. Hat Esav gedarvt sein, so Esav needed, in order to be able to deal with the world, a yidei tzayid, knowing how to trap. Rashi says lotzud v'laramis, to trap and to trick. We are clear bekama mikoimes, as explained in many places, as kidei zu durchführen the avodah in Welt, that in order to accomplish the service in the world, darf man ankommen zum inyan ha-ramoes. You need to come to the idea of trickery, to trick. Kaviyachol, as if to say, men darf sich anton in levusha mizbarer, you must dress on, you must put on the clothing of who you're trying to sort out here. Das haste, which means, as the neshama vernehmt sich mit inyonim from Welt, the soul occupies itself with worldly matters, wie achila ushtiya v'chula, eating and drinking. Was haben oibanoif kishayches netzir, which on the surface don't have a connection to the soul. What has the soul got to do with eating and drinking? But when the soul does these things for the sake of heaven, so it sorts out the holy sparks which find themselves in the physical matter. Das als is aber nur wie der Inyan is mitzad Avram v'Yitzchak. That's only from the perspective of Avram Yitzchak. But in the actuality, noch dem was hat aufgehört chinuchoi. Und Avram, after the education of Avram stopped, und Esav yotza, and Esav left, went away. hat sich abgerissen von seinem Scheiches zu Yitzchak. He tore himself away from his connection to Yitzchak. Hat Mekalkel gewonnen. He actually ruined. Und ist geworden, Ish Yedeus Tzayid so he became a man that knows how to hunt and to trick, a man of the field, but past literally, which is Yotzo Letarbus Ron. He went out to bad behavior. So the Rebbe basically explains over here that um, not necessarily when they grew up and he became a Yedei Tzayid was Abraham trying to um, instill to be able to overcome. And you got to be in the world and use the tools of the world in order to overcome it. But that's Avram's perspective. But yet, then Esav took it further and he tore himself away and he became literally a Yeshode, a tricker, etc. Yud, der Bir Hanal, as vi Esav wird Neule von Yitzchak is er Toiv, this explanation that Esav, as he's born from Yitzchak, he's really good, is Masim. This fits Vinilva. We can learn this from the Bir from Alten Rebbe, from the explanation of the Alter Rebbe. Hatam for was Yitzchak had gewollt geben the brachas to Esav. Why Yitzchak wished to give the blessings to Esav? As das is der Far, was Yitzchak had geguckt auf Esav, and that Yitzchak was looking on Esav, says the Alter Rebbe, wie is mitzad Reishe, as he is in his root, in his head, his shorshe root. Was dort der Herzog Kanal, over there you can sense der Teuvi Ilui von dem Inyan Beseder Avaiden Welt, of there you can see the good and the advantage of this concept and the order of service in the world. Nicht zu nispol werden von der Alomis in Olam Hazeh, not to become affected by the obscurities of this world. Va'adrabe, on the contrary, to poil sein, to impact that koiver sein as Welt Gufa, to conquer that the world itself, so this batter in this Alaver and Kedusha should be sorted out and elevated to Kedusha. And that's what the Alter Rebbe explains, that he wanted to bless, Yitzchak wanted to bless Esau because in his root, he is not bad because he wanted him to conquer the world. But yet, Aval Pikein sein, the brachas gegeben geworden Davke zu Yaakov. But yet, the brachas were actually given to Yaakov. Because weil nur hat gehad dem koyach zu mevader sein Elam Hazeh. It was only Yaakov that had the power to really sort out this world. Dafke durch dem was misa yoshev holim, specifically because you sit in the tents. Mahod dem koyach ha-Torah, you have the power of the Torah. Kemen denoch mevader sein Elam Hazeh, umachen von Elam adir lo yisbarach, and make from this world a dwelling place for Hashem blessed. That's why Yitzchak ended. That's why Yitzchak ended up giving the brachas to Yaakov. While there's an idea to give it to Esau because to go ahead and try to conquer the world and to elevate it to Kedusha, but in the end of the day, how do we have a power to conquer the world? It's only through the Yeshuv HaHolim, through Yaakov. Thus, the Rebbe said this is also the lesson in the actual service of Hashem. Even though we are sons of Yaakov. Meint das nicht, dass sie darfen sich benugenen, doesn't mean that darfen sich benugenen, that they should be satisfied with the Avodah of Yeshiva Holim, from sitting in the tents. We're children of Yaakov. Yaakov was Yeshiva Holim, so that's what we should do. But the Amru Chazal, our sages of blessed memory, says, a person says, I'm only going to study Torah, he doesn't even have Torah. But as darf sein by ze sein, as darf by ze sein euch die Avodah, they also have to have the service von ish Sode. Weil euch die Avodah, because also that Avodah, the Avodah of Sode, is übergegeben geworden zu Yaakov. That was also given over to Yaakov. Yaakov was due the Sode as well. And with the Remez in Pirush Rashi of Toldos. As Rashi hints, the hint that we find in Pirush Rashi Toldos, Yaakov and Esav ha'amurim beparsha. Yaakov and Esav, as they are said in the portion. Rashi said, Eila Toldos, Yaakov and Esav that are written in the parsha. I dar wissen He needs to know as his Muslim sein beide Toldos. You need to have both children, both beide Sugi Avedis, both categories of service. Sai Avedis Yaakov, also the service of Yaakov, and Sai Avedis Esau, and also the service of Esau. Aber Chaz v'Sholem, need v'Esau is given the not God forbid as Esau was actuality, but in the Ephim v'Amurim b'Parsha. Told the Parsha as he's in the Parsha. The Esav Avidos is einen al Torah, that Esav and his service are according to the Torah to be in the Sadeh and to transform the Sadeh al Torah. In order to accomplish this, darf man frier magdim sein der Avodah for Yaakov. First, you need to proceed with the service, the Avodah, which is Yaakov. Yishtam Yeshev Oiholim, innocent sitting in the tent. So Pirush Rasha now, is Mahapich, as also hinted in this above Rashi. He switches the Seder HaHilode, he switches the order of birth when he's Magdim Yaakov LeEsav. Yaakov ve'Esav Amurim b'Parsha, not Esav ve'Yaakov, but first Yaakov and then Esav. Because the idea that Frier darf Menzechav gem mit Limud Torah. First, you need to devote yourself with the study of Torah. Unin an Eifum von Ishtam in a way of innocence. Learn and Torah bit mimus. Learn and Torah with wholesomeness, with fullness. Nicht zu proven fakrim and chas v'sholem v'shteit in Torah. Not, God forbid, to try to crooked, to make what's written in Torah to interpret crookedly. A reinteitchen to translate yitzrei chas v'sholem in Torah. Your own inclination into Torah so that you can do as your Yetzer wants, Yetzer Hara. There's zuchum dem emes from Torah, but to see, really search for the truth of Torah. That comes first. But that's not the end. Zusammen der Mit darf man wissen. But together with this, we must know, as by them, Torah sich nicht abstellen. You can't stop by this. Noch der Avodah von Yoshev Aholim. After this service of sitting in the tents, darf man turn in Soda. You got to go in the field. You got to work in the field, do in the field. Berdei zu fangen, in order to capture. Tzayid, von Inyone Ha'olam, to capture the hunting from the worldly matters, und the fun machen matamim, and from the worldly matters make tasty food, for an Eberstrom for Hashem Avinu Shebashamayim, our Father in heaven. Even though in order to accomplish this service, you need to know how to hunt. You must dress yourself up in the garments of the world. Wissen, was Welt kocht sich. You got to know what the world has passionate about. When you speak to a Yid who is, God forbid, he's in the field, you got to know what's his interest, what's his passion. You need to bring him close to Yiddishkeit. Can man mit ihm nicht reden in Loshen HaKodesh? You can't speak to him in Loshen Kodesh, in the holy tongue, und asignen, and in such a style, was his masim fardiva seinen, that is fitting for those who are Yeshiva Holim, who sit in the tents. Can't talk to him that language. Nor medaf reden is vas Medina. You gotta talk the language of the country. Und dem Teuchen von der Reid, and also the contents, what you speak to him, is an levush hamasim, is a fitting garment for anisha soda, for a field man, a man in the field. Ubashen Rambam, as the Rambam says, Yizar is oisoy, how to hasten, to encourage the learning of a child, bedvorim sheimahuvim etzlo, things that he loves, lekatnes shono, because of his young age, childish age, I goes him to give him nuts. Uksheyagdil, when he grows, menolim yofim, you give him nice shoes. Uksheyesholem b'sichlo yoser, and when he's more accomplished intellectually, you give him mamin chulu yichabducha, they will honor you, giving him all the motivations to interest him in the study. B'chol zeh meguna. This is really degrading. This whole thing to learn for all these, for shoes, for honor, for money, for nuts, for all these things. However, it's necessary because of the lack and the small mindedness of the person. We got to give him things that he can appreciate. Strebung zur Geuswuchelu. Since, although, in the meantime, he's talking about striving for what? For nuts, etc. Since he does it as a follow-up, a continuation of his service, as Yoshev Aholim sitting in the tent, but he does him, this protects him, as ein avoda in sodas al zayin ledarki haTorah, that his service in the field should go and according to the path of Torah. Says Toldos Yitzchok Amurim Parsha. These are the children of Yitzchok that are said in the Parsha. The Torah guides it. It's not the field itself. It's not the Ishsoda. It's not the Eastern field, but it's Amurim Parsha. Und durch dem, was man findet durch die Avoda von Toldos Yitzchok, and by accomplishing and bringing through the Avodos Yitzchok in beide Suga Avoda now in both categories of service, is mezoiche bekorev zu dem Zman. We merit very soon to the time when Yemru Yitzchok Ato Avinu, your father Begula Hamitis Vashlema, the true and complete redemption of the Mashiach Tzidkenu through Mashiach Tzidkenu. Mesichas Shabbos Pashas Toldos Tavshin Mem Aleph.